Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Making Monsters. We're continuing on our draft series, some potential picks at number 10 and beyond. This one may be a little bit more of a look into some of the later. There are two second round draft picks for the Chicago Bears, so maybe some in that or a little bit later. And I'm joined by Alan Cole. He covers he's a South Carolina beat writer for rival Gamecock. Alan, thank you so much for hopping on with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Taylor. How are you?
I'm great. I was saying right before we hit record that it was funny because the last time that I had you on, it was a pre-draft series talking about the year of Zach Pickens and Cam Smith, and then the Bears ended up drafting Zach Pickens. So that one ended up being one of the ones that actually happened, and I wouldn't be mad if I manifested another Gamecock, honestly, because I personally was very high on South Carolina's defense this last year. I liked a lot of the things they did defensively and a lot of the players coming out of this draft. So I want to get to a few of those and then get your thoughts on maybe some of the people that you do, maybe some sleepers from South Carolina that people aren't talking about. Let's start with Demetrius Knight, though, linebacker. I don't know if this is something that the Bears will specifically target. And honestly, none of these names have been directly linked. A lot of times you start hearing some of these, later mock drafts and stuff like that. And I haven't quite seen anybody directly linked, but I think some of the needs for the Bears are relative to what South Carolina does have in this draft prospect wise. Linebacker, not so sure, just because I do feel like he was more of that Mike linebacker type of guy. And the Bears are set there. The Sam linebacker, they just parted ways with Jack Sanborn. So that's more of the question mark. But I still want to talk a little bit about him because I really like Demetrius Knight. One of the older prospects, though, in this draft, which I think sometimes has hit and misses. Sometimes that's a good thing because there's the maturity there. There's the experience there. Sometimes people flag it as a problem, Velus Jones being one of those previously. But let's chat about that a little bit, his time and that being that older prospect is because he did, I think he was 60 years in college.
You hit the word maturity there. And I'm seriously not just saying this because I'm on. I've never covered a more mature college football player than Demetrius Knight Jr. It makes sense. He was 24, I think. He's married. He's a father. He's an adult. He's an adult in the college football room. And you can just tell the way he carries himself, the way his teammates talked about him, the way the coaches talked about him. It takes a lot to come in as a transfer and be a leader, but he was the leader of that defense, even as a sixth-year guy who was only in the program for less than a calendar year. Can't say enough about him as a person. Like, again, seriously, one of my favorite players I've ever covered just from an interview, quotes, talk to you after a win or a loss kind of deal. And as for the football player, I was very impressed last year. I was kind of surprised. You just don't know what you're getting with a transfer from a mid-major. He came in from Charlotte, but the ball instincts are there. The tackling is there. It's kind of, again, what you'd expect from a sixth-year player, right? I understand what you're saying about the age, and that can scare an NFL GM away. They get off the rookie deal, and they're 29 by then. Like, I get that. But he's put together as a football player just in terms of kind of understanding where he needs to be, what he needs to do. And then, like I said, of all the guys we're going to talk about today, he was the best one locker room-wise. I'm sure NFL GMs discovered that during this process.
Yeah, let's chat about that a little bit because I think the three schools, he went to three different schools. There's Georgia Tech, Charlotte, and then he made his way to South Carolina, which first of all, jump from that, you're going straight into the SEC, which I think also is a testament to what he believed, the level he believed he could also play on. But share a little bit of that story, what ended up leading him to South Carolina this last year.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about his time at Georgia Tech. I mean, there was a coaching change in there. I know that. I think that was part of why he left. He had Jeff Collins, and then obviously he got fired in 2022, I guess, or maybe it was 23. But no, I think it's exactly that. He knew he had 1 year of eligibility left. He knew he wanted to get himself in a position like this, where we could be talking about him as a day 2 or a high day 3 draft pick. And the SEC, he wanted to bet on himself. Obviously South Carolina close to Charlotte, easy connection there, easy contact with Shane Beamer. I think he was a really good culture fit here for Shane Beamer. Like I said, he kind of bet on himself, and I think we're going to find out next weekend he won, whether that's 3rd round, 4th round, whatever that actually ends up being.
Let's backtrack a little bit to the South Carolina defense. I talked about how high I was on them, but when you go back and you look at just through college football this last season, they're were one of the better teams when it came to those points allowed. I think it was only like 18 points a game they were allowing when they were playing. And so tell a little bit about Beamer and that South Carolina defense this year, what really made them tick.
It's kind of one of those years where everything came together. They had, I think the number before the year was 8 of their top 10 tacklers from 2023 back for 24, which is just unheard of in modern college sports with the portal and everything. So you had those guys back. You added in transfers, Knight being one of them. You had a pretty good foundation on the back end, both starting safeties. One of them I think we're going to talk about here in a little bit were 3-year starters. And then you added a 5-star true freshman in Dylan Stewart, who kind of put it all together there at defensive end opposite Kyle Kennard, who came in as a transfer as well. So you just kind of had that right mix of returning guys, stability, transfers, and then one very, very talented true freshman who made an impact right away, and all that. And it was a well-coached group. Clayton White knows what he's doing. He's got that scheme down pretty well by now. That was his 4th year as defensive coordinator here. So it was kind of a perfect storm just in terms of talent, coaching, and kind of roster acquisition.
So when you talk about, you mentioned that tackling, so you're already returning a ton of guys who are some of the best tacklers on the team and probably in college football. And then you add a guy who also adds to that level of being able to be an efficient and consistent tackler. But then you also, when you talk about a Demetrius Knight, one of the things that people say is not only is he can play at a high level when it comes to that tackling ability, but also being able to like shoot up the gap and being able to get into the backfield and create plays back there too. But then they also talk about the natural instincts he has as a blitzer when South Carolina did use him in that area. So how do you see him fitting best in the NFL at the NFL level? Where is his best mark happening?
It's interesting you mentioned the blitzing because South Carolina really didn't blitz much as a team. Their front 4 was so good last year. Stewart, Kennard, the defensive tackles, they didn't really have to that much. But you're right. When he did, he had good instincts. As for a fit, it's hard. I'm trying to think where. I definitely don't see him as like a pure pass rushing linebacker. I don't think that's going to be him.
Yeah.
But I think like you said, it's kind of run stopper. I don't know about 3 down linebacker, but I think he's going to be an effective player. I also think he's just because, he's got some speed. He's a good tackler. He's very instinctual. I think he could be a very good special teams player too. I think that's always GMs looking for that, fill out your roster. Not saying that like he's going to go undrafted and someone's going to pick him up to couple punts, but like, I think he's someone who could help someone right away on special teams too, just covering kicks and punts just because of how aware he is and how good he is in space.
Yeah, and that's why it will be. He's somebody that, like I said, I don't think the Bears would technically target him just because of that positional need. But if you're talking about a player that I think if you're looking for a special teams player that you can develop into a Mike linebacker that will be your future, I feel like it's probably not a bad route to go depending where he's going to end up falling. I'm going to switch over to TJ Sanders now. When you talk about different paths, we talk about Demetrius Knight being, two schools previous, then getting to South Carolina. TJ Sanders kind of climbing his way through South Carolina and redshirting in 2021 to being a really big piece about with that defense in South Carolina this last season. So tell us a little bit about his journey and what you saw through his growth from that 2021 season to last year.
Yeah, TJ Sanders, one of those guys who came in with Shane Beamer in 2021. He was sitting behind a guy like Zach Pickens 2 years ago here, kind of learning from those guys. And it was a very good defensive tackle room. You had Tonka Hemingway and Boogie Huntley as well, who both might get picked on day 3 this year. And I think of all of them, he was probably the most purely talented, just kind of developed. He's got the right frame. He's got the right size. It's kind of what you want to look the part of a defensive tackle. And then he's a really good pass rusher. I think he kind of fits more the mold. You kind of had Tonka and Boogie doing some of the dirty work inside, and TJ Sanders, I think he had 4 sacks last year from the interior. I don't know how many quarterback hurries, but he's got good instincts. He's in around the quarterback. He's good at getting his hands, just using his hands in general, whether that's to finish a play or to knock a ball down. He's going to get his hands in passing lanes. I think it's clear why you're asking about him. I think of the 3 defensive tackles South Carolina had who entered the NFL draft process, he was definitely the most talented, and I get why he's probably going to be a day 2 pick.
Yeah, the versatility is a thing a lot of people talk about. I think in South Carolina, he played from 0 to 5 tech. So you're seeing him all over the defensive line. And the one thing that now Bears fans are trying to figure out, Alan, is there's a new defensive coordinator. Obviously, they part ways with Matt Eberflus, who was calling plays. And then now you have Dennis Allen, who Dennis Allen has a lot of experience in the NFL. His kind of specialty is that secondary, but he builds his secondary a lot off of what happens in the interior and creating the pass rush on the interior defensive line. So a lot of people are kind of saying maybe it's not their focal point because they have a Javon Dexter and they have an Andrew Billings and Zach Pickens is sitting behind him. But if you were to bring someone in who is all of a sudden and almost immediately creating that pass rush from the interior and how it affects the secondary. You saw it at South Carolina this season, what that pass rush did to help those back end guys. And I just feel like that fit makes sense when it comes to what he can do pressure wise and getting to the quarterback.
No, I completely agree. Not just for Chicago, you're here for Chicago's purposes, but for any team, we always talk about like production and just the whole thing is you got to be able to finish plays at this level that if you give a quarterback an extra second, they can burn you for a long touchdown pass, whatever that might be. TJ Sanders finished plays. I mean, 4 sacks as an interior defensive lineman is not normal, I guess. I mean, I'm sure there were some who had more. No one on this team who had more, but especially when you have so many good edge rushers on a team like South Carolina did, and you kind of normally think of the sacks coming from the edges, especially with Kennard and Stewart. But he's in on plays. He finishes well. Like I said, good with his hands, versatile. There's a lot to like here for any NFL team.
There's one game that people go back to a lot with TJ Sanders, and it's the Georgia game and what he was able. Yeah. And that is one they talk about, number one, in both aspects. Part of it is that's a game where he just stood out, where you're like, holy crap, some of the things and some of the plays he was making. Some people started showing some saying, he was getting a little bit worn down late in the game. And are there concerns there in that area? So what have you seen through him in that time of just kind of being able to be from start to finish on the field, and if he is going to be a kind of every down guy on a defense, do you think he's able to do that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That was definitely probably the best game any of us have seen him play. I know he was SEC Defensive Player of the Week after that game. He was facing an NFL center in Cedric Van Pran for Georgia, and he kind of bullied him most of the day. The fatigue thing I don't think about as much. One, that was almost a year and a half ago now. That was September of 2023. Mm-hmm. That South Carolina team was not as deep as the one he played on last year. He had to play more snaps. I don't think an NFL team's drafting him to play 50 or 60 snaps week one. I just don't think that's realistic for a day 2 defensive tackle. So, no, I don't worry about that as much. I think that was, like I said, not as deep of a team. He had to play more. You're facing, an NFL center who, even if you are going to make plays, going to wear you down in that game. And it was a year and a half ago. And I think he's just stronger physically and mentally than he was in September of 2023.
Do you think it could be beneficial for him too, that over like being with the Zach Pickens, who he has experience with, and they know each other's playing style?
Yeah, I do. They didn't play a ton next to each other in 2022 because Pickens was obviously the superstar, the best player on that line, and Sanders was coming off a redshirt year, but they had some snaps together, and I don't think that could be anything but good for both of them.
Yeah. And so that's another thing. The defensive line, to me, I think is still going to be heavily addressed, even though they have added pieces in free agency to try and bulk it up, which I think to me, it makes it feel like at that number 10, they wanted it to be a more open and not, we have to take this position. So they made enough moves to where they're not forced into a pick at 10, which I appreciate that. I want to get on to now probably a lot of people's favorite player coming out of South Carolina, which is safety, and Nick, let me make sure I say this all right. Emmanwori, is that right? Okay. So Nick Emmanwori, it's funny because I was looking at some comps, and comps are weird. Some people love them. Some people hate them. Sometimes there's some where I'm like, that doesn't make sense at all. But one of the comps that I saw as I was reading one of the draft guides, and that they had Jaquan Brisker, which is funny because obviously Jaquan Brisker is on the Chicago Bears right now. They also put Kyle Hamilton. I'm a Notre Dame fan, so big Kyle Hamilton fan. But so it's interesting, those two comps and how I would relate. And if I was getting either of those players out of Nick Emmanwori, I'd be pumped. But his path is interesting because he was an emergency substitution, and that's kind of how he ended up getting out on the field. And then he turned into this massive key piece of that secondary. So tell us a little bit about that emergency secondary situation to being this key factor.
Yeah, it was honestly kind of surreal how it unfolded. He wasn't highly recruited really at all. He's from Irmo, South Carolina, which is right up the road from Columbia. I think it was like, if I remember the story right, Torian Gray, who's the secondary coach here and used to be in the NFL with Washington, saw him at a football camp or something and kind of told him not to put himself out there because South Carolina wanted to offer him and no one else knew about him. His only Power 4 offer was South Carolina. And, he comes in, he has a pretty good camp. He's back up on the depth chart. 2022, and then literally game one, drive one. It was like the fourth or fifth play of the season. The starter at his position got hurt. It was a kid named RJ Roderick. He went down injured. Emmanwori comes in as a true freshman, game one, drive one. And then on that drive, they were playing Georgia State. Georgia State went for it on 4th and 1. He shot the gap from safety, made a run stuff in the backfield, and pretty much never left the field the next 3 years after that. Super physical player, great instincts, good with his hands. Obviously, you saw at the combine test off the charts. Yeah. Again, there's a reason I've seen him mocked as high as like 15, like going in the top half of the first round. I don't know if he would quite be the pick at 10 for the Bears. Like you said, they already have Brisker, but there's everything you'd want in an NFL safety. I mean, I think the Kyle Hamilton comparisons are very interesting, and I understand where they're coming from.
When you talk about, so he had 2 pick sixes, and I think that's something we also relate to Jaquan Brisker. Jaquan Brisker's had those moments where it just kind of feels like he always knows where the ball is going to be, and that is in the run game, that is in passing situations. But tell us a little bit about that and the vision, because I do think different safeties have this for different reasons. Like, for example, you have guys who can just kind of bait quarterbacks. You have guys who just are so the IQ of football, they know where to be. And so how would you explain him in that world when it came to how he's able to get some of these picks that he was able to do? Because I think it was he had 4 picks this last year. I think it was. That
sounds right. I remember for sure he had the pick 6 against Oklahoma. He had one called back against LSU, would have been a touchdown. There was a penalty behind him. And then I can't remember what the other, Kentucky, I think it was, but yeah, no, it's obviously the football IQ's there. You can't do that if you don't have that. I think he is a sharp football player. It's all instincts, man. He knows when to break on the ball. He knows where it's going. He's phenomenal at reading the quarterback's eyes and kind of knowing what to look for. And he's just, like you said, when you combine all of that with the physical traits, the speed, the verticality, the length, everything like that, it's easy to see why he can get in those positions to make those kind of plays. And like I said, he's just a really instinctual football player. I don't have a number or a math on that, but like you can just tell watching him, he's one of those like it's why the tackling numbers are so great from the safety position too. He knows where the ball is. He's good at finding it. And then his frame, I remember his second college game. So that was week 1 when he came in. They went out to Arkansas the next week, the KJ Jefferson, Rocket Sanders, and they got run all over that day, but I think he had 13 tackles in his first career start. Like he's just good at finding the football and knowing where it's going.
Yeah, and those instincts, obviously, in the secondary are things you talk about a lot. And you talk about the speed, the size. He's a big guy, and so when you're talking about how that can transfer over to the NFL, and these guys, especially with the way that teams are using tight ends now, it's not often that you feel like a safety can match up to the tight end in that way, but it feels like he's one of the guys that could.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what they listed him as at the combine or what is not. You might have it in front of you. What he kind of ended up measuring it at in Indy, but he did cover tight ends in South Carolina. You do watch him, the size, the strength. You don't feel like he's overmatched kind of anywhere, whether that's out in space, having to cover someone with speed, like in a slot, or if it's a goal line situation and he's got to box someone out on a fade, anything like that. I think that's the way I put it. He never feels overmatched, even though they put him in different situations with some different kind of challenges.
Yeah, and that's what I don't know, especially with how high I'm thinking he's going to go, that the Bears go that route because they do have Brisker and Byard. But I do think that if he starts to fall at all, I mentioned they have 2 second-round picks. So maybe with that second-round pick, if for whatever reason he's still there, I could see it being a thing. Jaquan Brisker's also had back-to-back years with concussions. So that's something that the Bears are going to have to evaluate and see in the future, because if you think that in this moment you can draft a Jaquan Brisker replacement and he's going to, be able to start immediately, then it would be kind of hard not to pass up on that, especially with Dennis Allen and the way he loves his secondary and the way he kind of feeds off things in that light. But let's just kind of scroll through some of the other guys this year. I know Kyle, is it Kennard? Is that how you say that right? Yeah, so Kyle Kennard is one. Tonka Hemingway, you mentioned those. So just share a little bit about those 2 guys and their kind of places of how they fit defenses.
Yeah, Kennard's super interesting to me just because he is another one of those older guys, although not quite as old as Knight, but he's just, we talk about production with TJ Sanders. He was the SEC's leader in sacks this year, and it's kind of weird to say that. I know there's
Kennard was?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I'm like 99% sure. And now I'm going to look that up while I'm talking. But,
yeah,
he's got it's interesting. You see him mocked like second, third round, and I'm not really sure what the deficiency is, for lack of a better term. I mean, NFL GMs are smarter than me. They know what's going on here. I don't know. Like maybe he didn't test as well at the combine, but the stats speak for themselves, man. Like he transferred in from Georgia Tech. I'm trying to look this up right now.
I was going to bring it up.
Came in from Georgia Tech. He had, I think it was 5.5 sacks at Tech. Go ahead.
Yeah, so he had 11.5 this year. So I was trying to find the SEC leader for sacks, or the college football leader for sacks.
He didn't lead the country. I think he led the SEC, or at least was close to it.
Which you'll take that in the SEC, obviously. And that's 11.5 sacks. It's funny because we sit here, and one of the guys that I'm absolutely terrified the Bears will draft it. They keep mocking Shamar Stewart to us. And so he did. He had 11.5, and the closest behind him was Princely with 10.5. Obviously at Ole Miss. So and that's a guy that people are talking about also very highly. So I didn't know that. So that's something I know. But I'm terrified that the Bears are going to draft Shamar Stewart. This guy had 1.5 sacks, and now we're sitting here talking about a guy like this who had 11.5 in the SEC.
Yeah, I probably haven't read enough on it, like why, GMs are a little bit lower on him given that level of production. But I think, to me, you just look at, it's kind of the Philadelphia Eagles thing, right? Of just drafting guys who played really well in college, so to speak. Like 11.5 sacks in an SEC season. Like, I think if he does end up being a day 2 pick, although I have seen some mocks earlier in the process had him sneaking into the back of the first round. He's going to help anyone. As for Tonka Hemingway, kind of more of the run stopper than PJ Sanders. But again, I think late 3rd round, early 4th round, probably not a guy you're going to start right away. Definitely not. I don't know why I said probably, but can help a defensive tackle room, help a rotation, kind of in that way. And then I'm trying to think if there's anyone else in this draft. Rocket Sanders.
Raheem Sanders is one, and then O'Donnell for Fortune.
O'Donnell Fortune, the corner. Yep. Yeah. I think that's going to be a day 3 pick, but he is good in coverage. He just had kind of the similar thing to Emmanwori with ball skills, kind of instincts. I know there's some questions there, but I think nothing else. He probably fits in the category too of someone who could help a team on special teams right away.
Yeah. How much do you think, because I know this is going to be the question for a lot of at least Bears fans when we're talking about some of these secondary guys from South Carolina, of how much was it that the pass rush and the defensive line was so good? How much did that help the secondary compared to the secondary just being actually really good?
Definitely some. I mean, it'd be silly to say those two things aren't related. It's football. It's how it works. Emmanwori, I don't think there's much to that. I think he played really, really well with not good pass rushes in 2022 and 2023. So I don't think there's as much to that. Fortune maybe got a bump. I think he also got a bit of a bump this year just because he was the number 1 cornerback, and he kind of knew he was in a rotation in 22 and 23 with, Marcellus Dial, who's in the NFL now, Cam Smith, who's in the NFL now. So I think just knowing he's out there every play and kind of what his assignment is probably helped him too mentally. As much as anything, not coming in and out on different series. But yeah, I'm sure it helped him some. Emmanwori, I just think, is a really good football player who would thrive in any system, to be honest.
Yeah, there's when you look at those safety rankings, and obviously Malachi Stark sits a lot of the people, and he's right behind him in most people's draft rankings. I'm being a Notre Dame fan, I love Xavier Watts, but those 3 guys are probably the 3 safeties you're talking about the most in this draft. And so if Dennis Allen comes in and he's having conversations with Ben Johnson saying like, hey, this guy's a game changer, then I wouldn't be surprised if they at least considered it for one of those 2nd round picks. So it'll be interesting. But I know, like I said, I joked about it where I was like, I did the Zach Pickens one. We drafted Zach Pickens. If I could manifest one of these South Carolina defensive players, I wouldn't be mad, because I think that like I said, I love the way that the South Carolina defense just – in general last year, they were so fun to watch, and I'm a defensive girly, so it's fun to see that.
It was probably the bet. There was debate if that was the best defense in school history. They obviously had a couple really good ones with Jadavion Clowney here and Stephon Gilmore and all those guys in the early 2010s, but it was without question one of the best defenses in school history, and you're going to see why when NFL GMs draft, half a dozen guys off it next weekend.
Yeah. How do you, final one before I let you go? This is off draft topic, but how are you guys feeling about the Lenore Sellers? And I know he's kind of one of the highest ones being talked about, and the returning quarterbacks this year.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism here. It's going to be interesting just replacing all that defensive production, and they're going to have to win some games, more kind of shootout offensive style this year, I think. But I think what everybody learned last year is if you have Lenore Sellers, you have a chance to win, whether that's the last minute comeback against Missouri or Clemson or anyone else. He's just one of those players that gets you excited to watch, can make plays on his own, can create for himself. And I think that is kind of the general feeling here is that, there's questions, offensive line replacements, defense, whatever. But as long as you got number 16, you're at least going to have a chance.
Yeah, he definitely kept things exciting. There were moments where I was like, you'd be like, turn on the South Carolina game because this is
it really was. The Clemson game, some of the runs in that game.
Yeah. All right, Alan. Well, I really appreciate it again. I know this time of year is crazy for everyone, so I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. Have a good one.